Good afternoon. Welcome to the News Roundup for Thursday, September 11, 2025. I'm your host, Bill Thomas. We have a number of urgent stories to share with you today as our nation marks the 24th anniversary of the 9/11 terror attacks, and we'll have more on that story in just a bit. But for now, here's what's happening on the big Roundup. New details emerging in the assassination of conservative political activist Charlie Kirk, the shooter still on the loose. America remembering and honoring the victims of 9/11 with ceremonies nationwide, and NATO allies closing their airspace and going on high alert following Russia's provocative drone invasion. Also, China making outrageous claims about their recent military parade, and Japan's jumbo-sized sumo wrestlers, they look to take their sport to an entirely new level. All this and much more coming up right now on the Big Roundup. We have a lot to get to today, and we begin with breaking developments related to yesterday's tragic assassination of political activist Charlie Kirk while he was holding an open event at Utah Valley University. The FBI now releasing images of what they're calling a person of interest in the fatal shooting and offering a possible $100,000 reward for information leading to the identification and capture of the person responsible for Kirk's murder. The FBI also saying that they've now recovered a high-powered .30-06 bolt-action rifle, which they believe was used to commit the killing. That weapon wrapped in a towel and discovered in some nearby woods. Authorities also say the spent cartridge from the bullet that killed Kirk was still in the gun, along with the several other unspent cartridges, which contained transgender and anti-fascist writing. However, they say they're still trying to figure out what the writing means and whether or not they're an attempt to lead investigators in the wrong direction. Now, the FBI is currently analyzing both the firearm and the ammunition for any possible clues, including potential DNA and fingerprint information. In the meantime, officials say they're still turning over every stone and exhausting every lead as their manhunt for the treacherous assassin continues. They say they have good video footage of the individual and that they've been able to track the shooter's movements from the time he entered the university's campus to the point when he climbed onto the roof of the building, from where he subsequently shot and killed Kirk. Tributes are pouring in for Kirk, who was the founder of a group called Turning Point USA, which is highly influential among young conservatives. The beloved 31-year-old father of two young children was also a close personal friend and big supporter of President Trump. Now, for his part, the president says that violence and murder are the tragic consequence of demonizing people with whom you disagree, and he claims that the rhetoric of the radical left is directly responsible for the terrorism we're seeing in our country today. President Trump also ordering all American flags throughout our entire nation to be flown at half-staff through Sunday in Kirk's honor, and that he will posthumously award Kirk the Presidential Medal of Freedom, saying he was a giant of his generation. Final thoughts. This is the News Roundup Lowdown. So you know, Charlie Kirk was a great American, incredibly bright and talented, a self-made man, and while he didn't have a college degree, he was extremely well-read and well-educated and well-mannered. Charlie was a husband and a father, a community leader, an influential and peaceful voice for millions of people all across the country. You should also know that Charlie was enormously committed to his religious beliefs. He stood strong and proud for conservative ideals, supported the Trump administration at all times, and in my estimation, he never attacked, harassed, degraded any person or group simply because they held an opinion different from his. He was abundantly vocal about his opinions, but he never set out to harm anybody. Understandably, people were frightened by Charlie Kirk. He stood for the rights of the unborn child. He was instrumental in rocking the vote during the 2024 campaign, and some would even argue that he was, in some part, responsible for Donald Trump's return to the White House. Like the pop star Dion said all those years ago, sometimes it seems like the good, they die young. Abraham, Martin, Bobby, John, and now Charlie Kirk. By the way, the FBI, they may have gotten this one mildly wrong. They shouldn't be looking for a person of interest. Rather, they should be looking for a coward of interest. And with that, we welcome back to the program producer Davey. And Davey, regardless of whether or not you were a Charlie Kirk fan, I certainly was. This is an absolute tragedy. What are you feeling today?
Oh, it's a dark day in our nation's history for sure, Bill.
Yeah. And your thoughts and comments as well, highly encouraged. We're at newsroundupwithbill@gmail.com. Dave, once again, you were always in charge of the email bag, and who do we turn to first?
Okay, Bill, let's start off today with Steve, who's writing to us from Bismarck, North Dakota.
Welcome to the program, Steve. What do you think?
Steve says, this is a very sad day for our country. Yeah. Something is terribly wrong here, and we need to rally around the flag before it's too late. If it's not too late already.
No, it's not too late already. Very, very good point. I appreciate you checking in. Charlie Kirk, this is a guy who was strong and well-founded convictions. He never refused to debate anybody. Unfortunately, some people are so frightened, so overwhelmed by an opinion different from their own that they have to resort to deadly violence to stop an opposing point of view. Davey, just recently, Charlie Kirk was debating Governor Newsom of California. These are two guys with diametrically opposing political views, but they sat down, they had an intelligent conversation. Neither one vilified the other. He had another conversation with conservative talk show host Bill Maher. Once again, they don't see things equally. They don't see things evenly, but it was a very fair and reasonable discussion. You catch either of those debates?
I caught a couple of clips from the Newsom debate, but, I think Charlie Kirk's motto, prove me wrong, says it all, right?
Absolutely.
He was willing to debate anybody. Encourage freedom of speech in order to do so.
Yeah, debate anybody, anytime, anywhere, and on any topic. And he debated very fairly. Also, you do well to remember that it's only a coward who has to hide in a tree, behind a bush, or on top of a building, in this case, to quell their opposition. Just a tragic day. All right, turn now from one terrible tragedy to yet another, as today Americans from coast to coast marking the 24th anniversary of the dreadful September 11, 2001 terror attacks. A number of solemn tributes to the nearly 3,000 people who were killed by al-Qaeda militants on that day. Officials and loved ones of the victims taking part in somber ceremonies at each of the sites of those attacks, including in New York City, also at the Pentagon, and in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, where you'll recall a hijacked jet airliner crashed after the heroic crew members and passengers, they tried to storm the cockpit. People there commemorating the event by laying wreaths for the victim. At the World Trade Center Ground Zero site in Lower Manhattan, a number of people held up photos of the fallen during a moment of silence, marking the exact time that the first aircraft flew into the North Tower, before reading aloud the names of the victims and honoring their memory. Meantime, President Trump and the First Lady attending a patriotic ceremony at the Pentagon in Northern Virginia, where 184 people were killed when hijackers plunged a passenger jet into the iconic landmark. The president renewing our nation's sacred vow that we will never forget what happened on that fateful day. We all remember all too clear. Throughout our entire country, a number of community projects and volunteer efforts also taking place to honor the fallen. They include food and clothing drives, neighborhood cleanups, and other events, and all part of a national day of service. Now, the 9/11 attacks killed almost 3,000 people. Many of them were either working at the World Trade Centers when the planes crashed into them or were first responders who gave their lives in the line of duty. Final thoughts, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown. That was one of the most unimaginable and dreadful days in our nation's history. And I recall watching the coverage that morning just before 6 a.m. here, L.A. time. And it all felt like kind of a bad dream. You're still waking up. You're trying to take it all in. And we're interested now in what you experienced on that day. How were you personally impacted? How did your life change as a result of those terror attacks? And share your thoughts and comments with us. We are, once again, News Roundup with Bill at gmail.com. Davey, I imagine this is a big emotional moment with a lot of folks. And what are folks saying on email?
Yeah, a lot of people are weighing in, Bill. Let's start with Andrew in Burlington, Vermont.
Andrew, welcome to the program. What do you think? What happened
said,
on that
I remember
day?
9/11 like it was yesterday.
Yeah.
One of the worst days of my life, and things haven't been the same since. It was the day I lost my innocence.
Yeah, I think all of us feel that almost exactly that very same way. And I appreciate you checking in. Appreciate you sharing your thoughts and being so candid with us. And one more, Davey?
Yeah, here's one from Jill in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Hi, Jill. Welcome to the program.
And Jill says, I was in New York at the time, and I remember holding hands with a stranger who was crying. I never saw that man again, but the memory is etched into my brain.
Yeah, I can actually see that happening right now. You were there, I wasn't. We all had a different feeling because we're in L.A. We're halfway on the other side of the country, so we can feel it. We can see the pictures, but you were there. You saw it all happening in real time, and you experienced something that's really deep and impactful. Davey, one more, and then we'll press ahead.
Okay, Bill. Here's another one from Jane in Springfield, Illinois.
Afternoon, Jane.
And Jane says, I was watching TV when the plane crashed into the second tower. Yeah. My heart leapt into my throat, and in an instant, I knew our country would never be the same.
Yeah, and we haven't been the same, but we did fight back. And the one thing in my mind that stands out, the one particular thing, remarks made by President George W. Bush at Ground Zero. And this is a few days later, September 14, 2001. 43, he stood on a destroyed fire truck with his arm around retired firefighter, a guy called Bob Beckwith. I can see it in my mind right now. President Bush's remarks during that impromptu speech. He was using a bullhorn to address a crowd of first responders when somebody in the crowd shouted out that they couldn't hear him. He responded with, I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you. And the people who knocked down these buildings, they will hear all of us soon. That particular moment was met with cheers and chants. Davey, you might recall that. Cheers and chants of USA, USA from a very large crowd. That was a very impactful day. All right, change things up just a bit now, turning our attention to the escalating tensions in Eastern Europe as Russia's war against Ukraine threatens to spill over into NATO territory. You know, a number of our country's allies now completely closing off their airspace, and they're putting their militaries on high alert following the recent invasion of at least 19 Russian drones into the skies above Poland. NATO members Latvia says that even though they believe there's no immediate threat to their nation, not immediate threat, they are closing down their airspace because Russia's provocative move into NATO skies, it's a very definite warning signal for the entire alliance. They say that NATO must do everything in their power to keep these sort of drone attacks from happening ever again, and that restricting the airspace will help them identify any unauthorized aircraft. They also say that for the time being, NATO jets will patrol and safeguard their skies. Additionally, they say that Latvian defense systems are permanently deployed along their eastern border and that they now have the go-ahead to shoot down any enemy drones. Meantime, Poland now closing down all of their airspace along their shared 260-mile-long border with neighboring Belarus. And so you know, Belarus is about to begin a series of inflammatory war games with Russia as those two partners further cement their ties. You know, nearby NATO ally Lithuania also shares a 56-mile-long border with Belarus. They already have a limited no-fly zone in place and recently taking the action after a pair of drones flew in from Belarus and crashed into their country. And one of those drones was packed with explosives, and Lithuanian officials now say they are prepared to shoot down the next aircraft that violates their restrictions. And final thought, this is the News Roundup Lowdown, and something we've been saying on this program for a pretty good chunk of time. All of Europe right now should be on high alert and prepared for anything, and all as a result of Russia's war with Ukraine. It was just yesterday when Russian drones were shot down by NATO fighter jets over Poland. As a direct result of that provocation, an enormous area of Polish airspace along the Belarus border is now closed and is expected to remain sealed off for nearly 3 months. Following Poland's lead, Latvia, which is right next door to Russia, and Belarus has done likewise. They've closed off their airspace in what appears to be a preemptive strike on their part. They know what's up. In other words, in no uncertain terms, Latvia knows they are vulnerable, and they want their neighbors to know there's a line which they ought not cross. Lithuania sitting just below Latvia, also doing all they can to ensure that they won't be sucker punched. And they have likewise closed off their airspace along a lengthy border which they share with Belarus. Now, you put the pieces of this puzzle together, and it's very clear to see that Russia is a present, and a credible threat to not only Ukraine, but to a larger portion of Europe. And it looks like portions of the continent are preparing in advance and planning for any number of contingencies. Now, drop us a note with your thoughts and comments. Man, the world is changing minute by minute. We are News Roundup, newsroundupwithbill@gmail.com. Davey, to the email bag, and what are folks saying about this one? This is a hot topic.
Yeah, it's a topic we've been covering, Bill, and our listeners are now weighing in. So let's start with Walt, who's writing to us today from Charleston, South Carolina.
Walt, it is great to hear from you. I hope you agree with me. The world is changing minute by minute. What does Walt have to say?
Walt says Russia seems to be pressing their luck here. One more entry into NATO airspace and it's war.
Well, it's already war, but yeah, I think more and more players are going to be brought into their war. Russia is in the middle of this full-scale war already with Ukraine. They already hold 20% of that country, Davey, as you and I talk about on a regular basis, the eastern flank of Ukraine. Vladimir Putin is thirsting for more. You can feel it, you can watch it, you can sense it. And you got to look at Poland as a body of water. He dipped his toes into the drink yesterday with the drones, and all indications are pointing to him diving in deeper, expanding his operation, and in time trying to take more of Europe. All right, now some additional headlines that we're keeping a very close watch on in the News Roundup newsroom. China now breaking their silence and weighing in on last week's Victory Day military parade in Beijing, saying that all of the modern weapons which were on display show that the communist regime is ready for combat. You saw the pictures. I saw them. They looked very frightening. However, they also claim that they're not looking to start a fight, that they're not aggressive, and they're not looking to conquer anyone. Well, what about the threats you've made toward Taiwan? And if you're not trying to conquer anybody, what about funding Russia, buying oil and other things from Russia, and funding their war machine against Ukraine? I think you are trying to conquer someone. Also, good news for drivers throughout the USA as plunging oil prices have federal officials predicting that American consumers will soon be spending a smaller portion of their disposable income on gasoline, saying the percentage will likely drop to a 20-year low. Great news. Also, a significant change for 500,000 motorists in California as a Golden State program which allows single drivers with low-emission vehicles like EVs, and I would imagine, Davey, the hybrid cars as well, allowing those low-emission EVs to ride in the state's carpool lanes. It's about to expire, that program being directly tied to a federal incentive program, which the Trump administration has just failed to extend. And that prompted Governor Gavin Newsom to complain about an upcoming Trump traffic jam on California's state highways. Governor Newsom, welcome to the program. Our state highways, they've been jammed for decades, from as far back as the 60s through the 70s, 80s, and so on. Right now, you can't move an inch on the 405 anywhere in L.A. and Orange County. It's like that statewide. Don't blame the president. All right, switch things up just a bit now, and a quick glance at a few developing stories which are making headlines today in the world of business. A new report shows that a growing number of Americans now defaulting on their auto loans as the cost associated with buying and owning a car skyrockets due to inflation and tariffs. The consumer group behind the report warning that the trend is an indication that our nation might soon face large-scale economic problems on the level of the Great Recession. Got to buy a used car. Moving along, troubling signs for the U.S. economy, with inflation rising nearly 3% last month, while the number of Americans filing for unemployment benefits has now jumped to their highest level in nearly 4 years. As a result, the Federal Reserve now expected to cut interest rates when they meet next week in Washington. It's about time. And some good news to share with you, especially if you're in the market for a new house. The average rate on a 30-year mortgage falling this week to its lowest level in nearly a year. That long-term rate now standing at around 6.35%. That is some good news. All right, time now for the lighter side of news, where we take an engaging look at a few captivating stories, which are guaranteed to add a bit of sizzle or maybe some grizzle to your steak. And here's what's up. And don't forget the A1 sauce, Davey. We kick things off today with some colossal hard-boiled changes that are on their way to America's favorite convenience store. Oh, thank heaven for 7-Eleven. Yeah, 7-Elevens all across the USA now announcing plans to greatly improve the taste and the quality of their fresh food offerings by duplicating the tremendous success of their stores in Japan. In case you're not aware, 7-Eleven currently owned by a Japanese company, and they're now planning to spend up to $13 billion for the next 5 years to freshen up their menu. Their ambitious plan centers around the introduction of more than 1,000 in-store restaurants, as well as what they're calling heavenly Japanese egg sandwiches. They're apparently made with special pillowy milk bread, whatever that is, which are extremely popular with American tourists. 7-Eleven, for me, Davey, it's kind of like Disneyland. Disneyland for grown-ups. And they've got everything from chips and sodas to Slurpees and beef jerky. You like the Slurpees and the beef jerky, Davey?
Everything's great at 7-Eleven, Bill.
Everything is great at 7-Eleven, except maybe the egg sandwiches. They got Pampers and Twinkies, aspirin, Hershey bars, and more. You can get pretty much anything you need at 7-Eleven. But the one thing you don't need from 7-Eleven is an egg salad sandwich. Foodstuffs prepared with eggs, mayonnaise, and an expiration date from last Sunday should not be purchased from 7-Eleven. Sushi, by the way, Davey, is another 7-Eleven no-no. And as you know, and I say this all the time on this program, sushi is only good when it's not cooked properly. And frankly, I'm not 100% convinced that 7-Eleven sushi is not cooked properly. Although the goldfish crackers, you had the goldfish crackers, 7-Eleven, Davey?
Never had one of those, Bill.
The goldfish crackers, they're pretty good. They're kind of like Cheez-Its, but they're in the shape of these little goldfish, and they're pretty good. Those are the cracker equivalent of 7-Eleven sushi, the way I see it. Now then, Davy Cakes, let's see if we can wrestle another story out of you. And what's up next?
Well, Bill, what's your favorite sport? Let me ask you that.
Besides pickleball?
Oh, well, you like pickleball, huh?
Outside of pickleball, I'd say my favorite sport is probably, thinking out loud, sumo wrestling.
Okay, there you go. You ask for it, you got it.
That's our story?
Yeah, absolutely. Well done.
All right, we'll stick around Japan a little bit longer and now take a look at a sacred tradition, which literally is on the verge of changing, and in a big, giant way. A growing number of women in Japan are now setting their sights on competing in the country's traditional sport of sumo wrestling. Say it isn't so. However, there is one small problem. Small. In sumo, there's never a small problem. There's always a big problem. In Japan, apparently women are still completely barred from entering the ring. According to custom, the sport's 1,500-year-old ritual and ceremony totally forbid participation by the fairer sex, and a whole bunch of people aim to keep it that way. In the meantime, other people in favor of changing those rules, they're pushing back. They say that more women than ever now competing in sumo matches at the amateur level, that women's sumo matches the intensity of men's battles, and that eventually they even want the opportunity to compete against men in the Olympics. I didn't know they had sumo in the Olympics. In any event, come on, Japan, it's a new world. I will not sit idly by while you try to exclude women from the greatest sports in the history of the universe. Male and female rikishi, some of the greatest athletes on the planet. No, they can't run a 3-minute mile, and they'll never get a job as a wide receiver in the NFL. But every time I see a rikishi sporting one of those nifty orange mawashis, I'm just beside myself. It's a pretty nifty look. All right, now time for a change. You know, we don't need Monday Night Football. Davey, we need Sunday morning sumo wrestling, which sort of sounds like a kid's cartoon. I'd sign off on that. All right, so dribble on now to our next item. And Davey, you were telling me earlier today that we have a story about the greatest basketball team in the history of the world. Is that right?
Absolutely, Bill. That's what we got.
All right, finally today, we're going to share with you another uplifting sports story which concerns the greatest basketball team in the history of the planet. In fact, I'm not even sure they've ever lost a game. Well, maybe just one. Dave, I never told you this. You got a minute?
I'm listening, Bill. What do you got to say?
This is a story about the Harlem Globetrotters. They did lose one game. Back in 1974, I went solo against the entire team, and I won by 8 points. Did you ever read about that?
Wow, I never heard about that one, Bill.
Yeah, they may have tried to bury that. I think the Globetrotters were kind of embarrassed by that, but I did beat them. That's a true story. The amazing Harlem Globetrotters planning to make the rounds again as part of their upcoming 100th anniversary tour. The legendary team, they'll be busting out a whole bunch of new uniforms and special golden basketballs for their entertaining mix of athleticism and shenanigans. And in case you're not aware, they always tip off against the same opponent, the hapless Washington Generals. And when the Globetrotters are done with the Generals, they'll be the Washington Corporals, if they're lucky. By the way, the iconic Globetrotters were originally formed in Chicago by a number of black athletes who were not permitted to play professionally at that time, and they've since gone on to become one of the most recognizable names in all of sports. And didn't you tell me Wilt Chamberlain, the great L.A. Laker, was one of the Globetrotters, Davey, at one time?
He did at one time play for the Globetrotters, Bill. Well done.
He should have stayed with the Globetrotters. Lakers weren't half bad, but I dig the Trotters. A little background on the Globetrotters. They've been making 4-point shots, not 3-point shots, 4-point shots for about 100 years now. They've also won over 27,000 games, and that means the Globetrotters, well, the Globetrotters got game. They are the winningest team in the history of basket-type ball. Gone for now are Goose Tatum, Curly Neal, and Meadowlark Lemon from the old days, but the new roster of players, even blindfolded, could easily beat any NBA team without so much as an ounce of effort. That's how good they are. And that is a look at the lighter side of news. And what are you thinking about basketball champs, females taking over sumo wrestling, or dangerous food items at your neighborhood 7-Eleven? Drop us a note, and you will catch us at newsroundupwithbill@gmail.com. Big fan of the 7-Elevens, Davey. The one near my house was actually a drive-through at one point. Did I ever tell you that?
No. Are you being serious, Bill? You actually had a drive-through 7-Eleven?
Well, it was a temporary drive-through. Somebody had a little bit too much to drink one night in the parking lot, thought the gas was the brake pedal, hit the gas, and went through the plate glass window. Nobody got hurt, but for the night, that was a drive-through 7-Eleven. You get that.
Wow. Well done.
Pretty interesting. All right, to the email bag we go, and what are folks saying?
Okay, here's one from Toshi, who's writing to us from San Francisco, California.
Hiya, Toshi.
Toshi says, sumo wrestling is a fantastic sport, and it's much better than stupid American football. It is a sacred tradition, and women should not be allowed to play. Thank you.
Well, listen, let's be inclusive. If women want to be sumo wrestlers, I say have at it. That is a very complicated sport. Only the best of the best rise to the top. And who doesn't look good, Davey, in a mawashi? Come on, let's be all inclusive. Appreciate you checking in, but I say you got that one wrong. Women, come on down. You'll make fine sumo wrestlers. And who's up next?
Here's one from Calvin in Tupelo, Mississippi, Bill.
Bring it on, Calvin. What do you got?
Calvin says, the way things are going, eating at 7-Eleven is just about the only dining experience I can afford. As soon as they put tables, chairs in the restaurants, that's where I'll be taking my girl for date night.
Yeah, they say those egg sandwiches are pretty tasty. I would imagine somewhat affordable. You throw a Slurpee on top of that, some beef jerky, maybe some Hershey's candy as well. 7-Eleven's perfect crime. They've got absolutely everything. Big fan of the convenience store. Hey, one more, and we got to bust out.
Okay, Bill, here's one from Debbie in Platteville, Wisconsin.
What are you thinking, Debbie? Don't know where Platteville is, but it sounds like a lovely part of the country. What do you got to tell us?
Yeah, I think Platteville is in the southwest part of the state, Bill, probably
Beautiful.
near Iowa. Here's what Debbie says. Debbie says, I remember seeing the Globetrotters when I was a kid.
Yeah.
So much fun, and we need more of their pure joy to deal with the times we're in.
It is pure joy. When we were kids, the Harlem Globetrotters, whether it was actually at a game or watching on TV, the Harlem Globetrotters or the big carnivals, not the carnival, help me out, Davey, Barnum and Bailey of the circus.
Well,
remember Barnum and Bailey circus?
Of course, Barnum and Bailey was fantastic, but so were the carnivals, too. Let's not forget those, Bill.
Yeah, and Circus Vargas. There were a lot of great things when we were kids. Today, things seem a little out of control with the $150 to go to Disneyland, and the sporting events are a little pricey as well. But yeah, the Harlem Globetrotters, nobody doesn't like the Harlem Globetrotters. That was a beautiful time in our youth. And time now for us to call it a wrap on the Thursday edition of the Big News Roundup. And before we go, as we do each and every day right here on the program, we like to share with you a very notable quote. And these important and timely words come to us today from the great Abraham Lincoln, who said, "Government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth." As you know, Lincoln was the 16th president of the U.S., serving as our nation's commander-in-chief from 1861 to 1865 and guiding our country through one of the most troubling periods in our nation's history. And now it is time for us to bust on out of here. But before we call it a day, don't forget the News Roundup motto. Write it down if you have to. Ask not what your podcast can do for you. Ask what you can do for your podcast. Real easy. Simply subscribe to the program. That way you'll never miss even a single episode. For now, it looks like our time, it's officially up, so have an awesome day today. Please stay safe. Let's all continue to watch out for one another. And with that, we turn to Engineer Henry and ask him to please dim the lights. Gently fade to black, and we'll see you right back here tomorrow afternoon on Finally a Friday.